Exposing the truth about BRICS, how your money became worthless with the US dollar's dominance to supercurrencies sponsored by BRICS nations. I know I'm not talking about the world's largest exporter of cinder blocks. I'm talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. BRICS. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about a possible supercurrency and its threat to your personal wealth, your ability to grow your personal wealth, and your ability to maintain that personal wealth. Like this video if you get any value out of this discussion at all, and definitely engage with the video and leave comments on what you think are my best and my worst moments. The first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the threat, if any? Why would anyone who uses US dollars care about a new currency? Well, there are really three different consequences for anyone dependent on US dollars for their economic success. Reduced dollar demand. Much of global trade, particularly oil, is based around the US dollar. If oil is no longer traded exclusively in US dollars, the global demand for the currency could decrease. This may lead to a decline in the dollar's value and potentially result in higher inflation and interest rates in the US. Declining dollar value will be seen from a consumer perspective as inflation. The less valuable the dollar is, the more expensive the goods that the dollar chases are. Another way of looking at this is the less demand for the dollar, the more of them will be available. And more dollars chasing the same or fewer amounts of goods highly correlates with general inflation, everyone's favorite economic phenomenon. As we've just experienced, more dollars chasing fewer goods or less valuable dollars can lead to much pain for the consumer in the US. And the general response of the Federal Reserve in these cases is to raise interest rates, among other tools, to help pull dollars out of the economy. The only problem is that the US is currently spending way over its means. In other words, it's deep in debt. And to finance the debt, the United States will have to keep borrowing money from its banker, also commonly known as the Federal Reserve. But those higher interest rates will make borrowing more money more expensive, and a debt spiral on the national level will occur. Paying interest on the debt alone will crowd out spending on other priorities, causing general calamities as things such as infrastructure and social services get crowded out. This in general will affect the US's status as a reserve currency, putting us on a path for more general inflation and higher costs for all goods and services, assuming inflation stabilizes. So what are the motivations for a new currency? Well, quite a few analysts will agree that there are three motivating factors for BRIC nations and some others as well to want to establish a new currency. And those would be to get around US sanctions, to de-dollarize in general, and to support the ambitions of the newest global superpower, China. Many countries around the world, Russia and China in particular, but many others in general, simply don't want to be in a place where their entire economies could be affected negatively thanks to political disagreements with whatever US politician happens to be in office at the time. We're all aware of the conflict in which Russia invaded the Ukraine, and it's caused much global condemnation, especially from the US. And one of the consequences of that was kicking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. Now, SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. It powers quite a few, if not most, international money and security transfers. And as you might imagine, Russia didn't take this lying down. They dealt with this by implementing their own system, specifically SPFS, the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, which already existed for the country since 2014 for domestic transactions, for international money transfers. But not only that, it increased use of an alternative payment system, including China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIBS. This allowed Russia to lean into some of their strong trading partners, including both China and India. Now, that played into a trend that has been building for a little while now, and that's called de-dollarization. Other countries that may not have political disputes with the United States may still want to avoid being overly dependent on the US if they believe that the dollar may not be as stable as it was in the past. The recent bout of inflation that has affected not just people in the US, but people who do business in the US dollar, and who do this across the globe. Well, that's simply one example of why folks may not want to be dependent on the dollar. Not to mention that over the last decade or so, the US has become increasingly unstable politically. And if we continue down that path, the dollar will likely become more unstable as well. And then, of course, there are China's ambitions on the world stage. China now is, or should be considered, the US's largest and most powerful geopolitical rival. And they stand to benefit from a switch in the majority of the trade from dollars to some other currency, particularly if they are in control of that currency. Given that China is a major trading partner with each of the BRICS nations, it's just convenient and makes a ton of political sense to form a currency bloc with those nations. So that's the motivation. But what is the result? Will new currency from these nations ultimately destroy the US dollar? Let's take a look at a historical example. In the last 30 years, another new currency that took the world by storm and for a period of time was up to twice as valuable as the US dollar. It was created and is still used for a large portion of global trade. However, the dollar is still around. I'm talking, of course, about the euro. Now, the euro is a currency used for trading among European countries to minimize currency conversions between the countries in the European bloc. And some of those countries have large global economies, Germany, France, and Spain as examples. None of them compete with the size of the US's economy, but together they form a powerful economic bloc. Just like none of the countries in the BRICS nations are as large as the US economy, but if combined, would represent an economy that's much larger than that of the US. Keep in mind that at one point, the euro was much more valuable than the US dollar. And there were even cases of Americans choosing to be paid in euros rather than dollars, which takes us to the question of what to do in such a scenario. So we have an example of a currency that came out that competed with the dollar, was and still is more valuable than the dollar, but nevertheless the dollar still was being used for global trade. This time around, it could be that this new currency, if formed by the BRICS nations, could in fact knock us off our perch as the global reserve currency. What would we do in such a scenario? Is there anything that you can do personally? If you can't beat them, join them. You may want to consider owning some of that very currency. Owning multiple currencies can be considered diversifying your portfolio, particularly if you don't have any other types of investments on hand. If one currency goes down, and if you're holding some value in another currency, whether it's euros, pesos, or this new BRICS currency, you'll be in a better position. You can also get some precious metals. Gold is the number one thing people think of when they think of getting into precious metals to hedge against currency devaluation, which is smart. And I'm a fan of gold for that purpose. But if you can't get your hands on gold, because it might be out of your price range or something that's not as practical as you would like, you can get your hands on other commodities. Commodities like silver, rare earth metals, copper. They're all probably going to continue to rise in value. Mainly because not only are they generally useful, but as technology continues to advance, they will continue to provide the physical backbone to enable that advancement. You also might want to consider getting some cryptocurrencies. In general, I think cryptocurrencies are way overpriced for the value proposition they provide. They are not companies, in many cases, that can provide you a dividend check, and not a commodity that you can smelt down and turn into something else, for the most part. And they're not bonds, a loan you lent out to someone else, for the most part. They're not derivatives of any of those things, in many cases. Now, keep in mind, there are some nuances to that statement, and it's a topic for another video, but that's generally true. They're zeros and ones on a hard drive somewhere, and in my mind, they should not be much more valuable than standard currencies, and their value might actually be subject to bubble status. Having wealth at least diversified into cryptocurrencies at least gives you the flexibility to be invested in other asset classes to suit everyone's favorite asset class, the dollar, see an untimely demise. You also might want to consider getting a business. This one should go without saying. No matter what currency people are trading with, if you offer them a solid product or an awesome service, they'll be willing to part with their currency and give it to you in return for having an excellent good or an excellent service. Having a skill is great, but just having a skill, no matter how lucrative, will forever keep you in employee status. Having a business allows you to scale your talents almost infinitely. And a great way to get started in a business is to find a side hustle. Work it until it becomes a main hustle and make a business out of that. I have a video on that up on your screen right now. And remember that a goal without a plan is a wish. A goal with a plan and no action is a wish list. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on all post notifications. I'm Derek West, you're watching Finance Squared. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.